Good evening. My name is Wallace Gator Bradley, and I'm the host of the Bradley Report. I'm also the president of United in Peace, Inc. And the show was put together by none other, by none other than the chairman of United in Peace, Inc. He's the producer of this show. And her name is Terry Marsh Bradley. We got an interesting show on the migrants, the tent city. We got a new police superintendent, and I want you to hear from out his own mouth. He believes, in my opinion, and from what I've heard and from what I've read, that it takes all of us working together, purposefully focused on community safety. But he knows that it can't happen without community law. We're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about two men that was wrongfully convicted for a murder that they didn't commit. And the city has settled to the tune of $25 million. We're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about the pinstripe patronage, where these private attorneys being hired by by the city, by the law department. And they charge the city of Chicago a lot of money. I saw some stories where they said to the tune of almost $1 billion in total. That's not counting the money that the city has to pay to settle the suits. Let's talk about that too. But without further ado, let me say, to God be the glory. Let's get on with the story. Hit that first story for me. Thank you, sir.
Handle the migrant crisis is up for debate, but the one thing aldermen agree on is living at police stations is not the answer.
We need to get those human beings out of those inhumane conditions right now. And clearly a tent with some type of secure facility is a slight improvement over what they're currently living in.
Mayor Brandon Johnson has asked all 50 city council members to identify a 2-acre space in their wards that can accommodate a large tent that would be equipped with heat and cooling units, cots, a mess hall, and water hookups, enough to house more than 200 migrants.
I think what was made clear, and I think should be made clear to everybody, is that because of the scale of what we're looking at, every neighborhood has to share in the responsibility.
But not every alderman wants or is able to share the responsibility.
I've looked in my ward. I simply don't have any available space. I have one of the most dense wards in the city.
Alderman Brian Hopkins' second ward includes parts of downtown, the Gold Coast, Old Town, and Lincoln Park. There are several vacant lots on the south side, but 17th Ward Alderman David Moore says they should be developed for residents, not new arrivals.
I'm a believer in help your people first, help yourselves first, help your community first, and then reach out and help others.
City Council's Immigration and Refugee Rights Committee Chair Alderman Andre Vasquez says the encampments can eventually be used for Chicago's existing unhoused population.
If you can make that case, then you can say this isn't just for one population, it's something that actually helps the whole city out.
Meantime, aldermen are doubling down on their call for more help from the federal government. Vice President Kamala Harris will visit Chicago on Wednesday for a campaign event. City council members are strongly urging her to visit those crowded police stations while she's here.
You know, this migrant situation is something that Mayor Brandon Johnson inherited. But it's becoming a crisis, not just here in Chicago and Illinois, but across the country. And in particular, a crisis from the various states where they have a Democratic governor, and especially cities where they have Democratic mayors, especially African-American mayors. It's going to come to the point where they're gonna have to say we can't take no more because there's no more room, because like the mayor Johnson keeps saying, and the people in the city of Chicago keep saying, you got to do something for the homeless. A lot of people are screaming about the tents being set up for the homeless. And it's going to come to the point where the mayor's going to have to address that. I see now that a lot of aldermen are understanding they got to work with the mayor for them all to put a letter together along with the governor of the state of Illinois, the county board president, and the national leadership, like the state senators, like the United States senators, along with the congressmen, have to let the president know that. What I'm saying is this: if you only have enough resources for 150, I'm being hypothetical, and the person that's sending the bus loads and each bus load has 75 or 80 people in it, and he's not caring, okay, that's the Republican governor. I think he's from Texas, or well, I don't know where he's from, but I know he's Republican governor. And he letting you know the only reason he's doing what he's doing, me, myself, I feel like it's human trafficking. Because you sending individuals from one place to another place, not caring how they're going to fend for themselves when they get to these towns. And a lot of the people in the city are concerned. I hear a lot of them talking about, they're reading about the MS-13 and all that type of situation. And they feel like that may start a lot of gang problems within the various community. All I can say is that it's inhumane what that governor is doing in Texas to the people, bringing them here and sending them elsewhere, for them to suck up the resources that's here for the citizens or the residents in the city of Chicago. People need jobs too here in Chicago. I'm just saying what I'm hearing, and it's a serious concern. You know, without further ado, could you hit the next story? Which article are you talking about? 'Cause there's two videos they can't play because I just played them. I might be technical difficulty, but I'm not arguing with no woman that knows what she's doing. So the next story, let's go to the next story. That's dealing with the settlement, $25 million settlement. There you go. Okay. Bring it down. Okay, right there. Thank you. The Finance Committee okays a $25 million settlement to two men wrongfully convicted of the 1993 murder of an IIT hoop star. Tyrone Hood will get $17.7 million after spending 22 years in prison. Wayne Washington spent 14 years behind bars and will get $7.5 million. But Alderman Brandon Hopkins worried the city council would be setting an unaffordable precedent. You know, I hear what Alderman Brandon or Brian Hopkins is saying. But I find it perplexing when he know that patronage army, pinstripe patronage army of private attorneys that's hired by the law department, charging the city for cases that they know they can't win. To the tune, there's been 3 stories on, to the tune of almost $1 billion. I've heard nothing from them. I've been speaking before the city council since 2016, especially about the Mark Maxson case. I put in the FOIA to find out how much have those law firms charged the city. Now, granted what I'm telling you, that's beside the money that they come back and settle for, because the city's insurance pays for some of those settlements. We're going to talk about that too. Don't go nowhere. Let me finish reading this. Two men who served a combined 34 years in prison after being wrongfully convicted of the 1993 murder of a college basketball star will divide $25 million thanks to a settlement advanced Monday by the City Council committee. If the full council signs off on the payment Thursday, Tyrone Hood will get $17.5 million in compensation for spending 22 years in prison for the murder of Marshall Morgan Jr., a student athlete at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Wayne Washington, who spent 12 years behind bars, will get the remaining $7.5 million. The city's insurance carrier will cover $5 million of the settlement, with the rest borne by Chicago taxpayers. Morgan Jr. was 19 years old, IIT basketball star, when his body was found 9 days after he was reported missing. He had been shot and his body had been wedged between the front and back seats of his mother's car. Beer bottles, cans were recovered from the vehicle, and Hood's fingerprint was on one of the bottles. Hood was questioned, denied involvement, and identified Washington as his alibi witness. Washington was located and told detectives that he had seen Hood driving the victim's mom's car and stated that Hood shot the victim while the two were attempting to rob the victim. Deputy Corporate Counsel Jessica Felker told the Finance Committee, after 36 hours in custody, Washington gave a handwritten statement. Washington now claims that statement was coerced and fabricated by the detective, who he claims told him what to tell the prosecutor. Both men have long accused now retired Chicago police detective Kenneth Boudreaux. That man's name has been involved in a whole lot of torture confessions. Confessions that was tortured out of innocent African-American males by Chicago police officers. Both men have long accused the now retired Chicago police detective Kenneth Boudreaux and partner John Holloran. Him too, his name is in the list, of concocting evidence and pressuring witnesses to testify against them. Washington said he was beaten into a false confession. After a bench trial, Hood was found guilty and sentenced to 75 years in prison. Washington chose a jury trial that ended in a mistrial. He ultimately pled guilty and got 25-year sentence. Felker told the committee both men claimed the true killer is Marshall Morgan Sr., the victim's father. He also had been suspected in the fatal 1995 shooting of his fiancée, whose body was similarly found wedged between the back and front seat of her own car. Wow. Also, the father had taken out life insurance policies on both Morgan Jr. and his fiancée before they died, Felker said. Morgan Sr., however, was not charged with his fiancée's murder, but in 2001, he did plead guilty to the fatal shooting of his then girlfriend. Wow, that's someone that was not in love with love, who was found in the trunk of her own car. He was sentenced to 75 years for that crime and remains in prison today. Hood and his attorneys launched a media campaign that culminated in a clemency request to then Governor Pat Quinn, who agreed to commute Hood's sentence in 2015. Washington had already been released in 2008. In 2015, the state's attorney's office agreed to vacate and dismiss charges against both men. 6 years later, Hood was awarded a certificate of innocence. Washington's request for a certificate of innocence was granted by the Illinois Supreme Court in July, on the eve of a trial or verdict by the $25 million settlement. Felker called the settlement fiscally prudent, noting the city went to trial on a wrongful conviction case earlier this year, and in May, that jury awarded the plaintiff $27 million as compensation for 24 years in prison. See, they're not winning any cases. Next week, hopefully by then, I have the answer to my FOIA about Mark Maxson. The two men here have spent a combined 34 years in custody, and at trial, they will likely seek $34 million to $68 million. They will use the certificates of innocence as well as the evidence against Morgan Sr. to prove their innocence, Felker said, noting that during a deposition, Morgan Sr. asserted his constitutional right to remain silent when asked about his possible involvement in his son's death. Also, plaintiff will present other allegations of misconduct against Detective Boudreaux, who currently has 10 other lawsuits pending against him. Alderman Brian Hopkins said he's concerned because in the past, the city has shelled out an average of $250,000 per year of incarceration in wrongful conviction cases. This settlement is off the charts, significantly higher than that figure. We're setting our own precedent here. I don't know why we would do that. What is the justification for this significant jump? Hopkins said. We're setting the bar extraordinarily high, he added. What we're doing right now is binding the city to a course of action that we can't afford. Well, you should have thought about that when it's your friends or somebody that you know that's a lawyer, a private lawyer that's charging the city to the tune anywhere from $300 to $500 for cases that they can't defend. And then the city has to pay the settlement and then have to pay those lawyers. That's why there's always a hole in the budget. Alderman Bill Conway joined Hopkins and Alderman Marty Quinn in voting against the settlement. But you don't vote against those lawyers' money. We're going to talk about that. I've always supported settlement where I believe the facts and the money fits, but this was about the amount, not the facts of the case. Give me a break. You send an individual to penitentiary for 25 years for cases they didn't commit, and it's because they was tortured by police officers and to commit the crimes, and then you want to fault the people that did the time? You need to lock them police up. The last time the city settled a Boudreaux case was in 2017. There were 4 companion cases, and we settled for a total of $30 million. The state's attorney's office was also a defendant in that case, and the settlement for another $29 million. In those 4 cases were 64 years incarceration, meaning the settlement was almost $1 million per year, she said. Alderman Andre Vasquez Ford bristled at the notion of putting a maximum compensation on a year spent in prison for a wrongful conviction. Whenever we talk about backing the blue, no one talks about the fact that we have officers who have been corrupt that led to these consequences that shouldn't have been officers in the first place. Vasquez said the Finance Committee also signed off on 3 other lesser settlements ranging from $150,000 to $350,000 to involve allegations of police wrongdoing, including a domestic violence victim. The third involved 2 women injured when a dead tree fell on them. The tree has been the subject of 2 311 complaints. You know, I've been talking about this, and I'm going to talk about this, and now we got a new mayor, we got a new Finance Committee chairman, Pat Dow. I want to say hooray, hooray, hooray. I also want to say hooray to the Budget Committee chairman, 28th Ward, Irvin, okay? And Mayor, you got a new corporate counsel. Stop them crooks from robbing the city on cases they know they can't win. Here's a man they know he was under suspect for putting his girlfriend behind the seat of her car. That man killing individuals like a serial killer. But hey, it's not for me to say, but I want to say this. To God be the glory. That's my story. Get rid of that pinstripe patronage.